The December wind cut through Elena Martinez like a blade as she stumbled down the gravel road, her feet already numb from the frozen ground. Each step left small spots of blood in the snow behind her, but she couldn't stop. Not now. The thin cotton dress she wore offered no protection against the Montana winter, and her arms were wrapped so tightly around herself that her fingernails drew crescents in her skin. Behind her, somewhere in the darkness, she could hear Marcus shouting her name. His voice carried that familiar edge of rage that made her stomach clench with fear. She had run before, but never this far. Never in weather like this. The decision to leave had come suddenly, triggered by the sound of him throwing her younger sister against the wall of their trailer. At 17, Sophia was still just a child, and Elena couldn't watch it happen anymore. The lights of the Carson ranch appeared through the swirling snow like a mirage. Elena had seen the property from the main road during her walks to town, when Marcus had allowed her to leave the trailer. The house stood massive and warm-looking, with golden lights spilling from its windows onto the pristine white landscape. She knew who lived there. Everyone in Cedar Valley knew about James Carson. At 34, James had inherited the ranch from his grandfather and built it into one of the most successful cattle operations in the state. People in town spoke of him with the kind of respect usually reserved for legends. He was the man who had refused 3 different offers from development companies wanting to turn his land into a ski resort. The man who employed half the valley during roundup season. The man who had never married, though plenty of women had tried to catch his attention. Elena had seen him exactly twice in the 3 years since Marcus had dragged her and Sophia to Montana. Once at the hardware store, where he had politely stepped aside to let her pass, touching the brim of his hat in acknowledgement. Once at the gas station, where she had watched through the window as he pumped fuel into his truck, moving with the easy confidence of someone who had never known real fear. Now she stood at his front door, her bare feet screaming with pain, her whole body shaking so violently that she could barely raise her fist to knock. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night. She waited, counting her heartbeats, wondering if he was even home. The door opened so suddenly that she nearly fell backward. James Carson filled the doorway, taller than she remembered, with dark hair still damp from a shower and concerned brown eyes that took in her condition with one sweeping glance. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, looking like he had been settling in for a quiet evening at home. The warmth from inside the house hit her like a physical force, and she swayed on her feet. "Jesus Christ," he said, and his voice was nothing like Marcus's voice. Where Marcus was always loud and harsh, James spoke with quiet authority. "What happened to you?" Elena opened her mouth to speak, but only a sob came out. She had practiced what she would say during the long walk, had rehearsed the words over and over, but now that she stood before him, everything fell apart. She was just a woman who had shown up at his door in the middle of the night, bleeding and half frozen, with nothing to offer and nowhere else to go. "I'm sorry," she managed to whisper. "I didn't know where else. Don't apologize," James said firmly. He stepped aside without hesitation. "Come inside. Now." The house wrapped around her like a warm embrace. The entryway alone was larger than the bedroom she shared with Sophia in Marcus's trailer. Elena stood, dripping melted snow onto the hardwood floor, suddenly aware of how she must look. Her dark hair hung in wet tangles around her face. Her dress was torn at the shoulder from when Marcus had grabbed her earlier. Her feet left small bloody prints on the clean floor. James disappeared for a moment and returned with a thick blanket, which he draped around her shoulders without asking permission. The gesture was so gentle that Elena nearly broke down again. When was the last time someone had touched her with kindness? "Sit down," he said, guiding her to a leather chair near the fireplace. The fire crackled cheerfully, casting dancing shadows on the walls lined with books. "We need to get you warmed up," and those feet looked at. Elena sank into the chair, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. The warmth made her injuries hurt worse, but she welcomed the pain. It meant she was safe, at least for now. James knelt beside the chair, his movements careful and deliberate as he examined her feet. "These need cleaning," he said, his jaw tight with what might have been anger. But when he looked up at her, his expression was gentle. "What's your name?" "Elena," she said. "Elena Martinez. I'm James. But I think you probably know that already." He stood and moved toward what she assumed was the kitchen. "I'm going to get some supplies to clean these cuts. Don't move." While he was gone, Elena looked around the room with wonder. The furniture was sturdy and comfortable, chosen for function rather than show. A pair of work boots sat neatly by the door. A coffee mug rested on the side table, half empty and still warm. This was a home where someone actually lived, not just a place to store things. The contrast to Marcus's chaotic trailer, where broken furniture and empty bottles created an obstacle course of dysfunction, was overwhelming. James returned with a basin of warm water, clean towels, and a first aid kit that looked like it belonged in a hospital. He set everything down with practiced efficiency and knelt beside her chair again. "This might sting," he warned before beginning to clean the cuts on her feet. Elena bit her lip to keep from crying out. Not because of the pain, but because of the tenderness in his touch. His hands were calloused from ranch work, but they moved with surprising gentleness as he worked. No one had taken care of her like this since her mother died 4 years ago. "How long have you been with him?" James asked quietly, not looking up from his work. Elena's breath caught. She hadn't mentioned Marcus, hadn't said anything about where she had come from or why she was here. But James seemed to understand anyway. 3 years, she said. "He brought us here from California after my mother passed. Said he would take care of us. Us. My sister Sophia. She's 17. Elena's voice broke on her sister's name. "He's been getting worse lately. Drinking more. And tonight," she couldn't finish the sentence. James's hands stilled for a moment. When he resumed cleaning her wounds, his touch remained gentle, but she could sense the tension in his shoulders. "Where is she now?" he asked. "Still there? I had to leave her." The admission felt like swallowing glass. "I couldn't get her out, too. She was unconscious when I left." James finished with her feet and sat back on his heels, studying her face. In the firelight, his features looked carved from stone, but his eyes were warm. "We'll call the sheriff," he said simply. Elena shook her head quickly. "No, you don't understand. Marcus knows people. He'll say I'm crazy, that I'm lying. He's done it before. Before, when the neighbors called about the noise. When Sophia went to school with bruises. He always has an explanation, and people believe him because he's charming when he wants to be." Elena pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "And because we're nobody, just 2 Mexican girls who have nowhere else to go." James was quiet for a long moment, considering this. Outside, the wind howled around the house, rattling the windows and reminding Elena that Marcus was probably still looking for her. She had bought herself some time, but it wouldn't last. He would find her eventually. He always did. "Do you have family somewhere else?" James asked. "Someone who could help?" "Our mother was undocumented. She cleaned houses to keep us fed. When she got sick, we couldn't afford treatment, couldn't risk the hospital asking too many questions." Elena's voice was steady now, telling a story she had never spoken aloud. "Marcus showed up at her funeral, said he had been her boyfriend, that he wanted to help us. We were grieving and scared and stupid enough to believe him. You weren't stupid. You were kids trying to survive." The simple statement, delivered without pity or judgment, made Elena's throat tight with emotion. She had spent 3 years telling herself that she should have known better, should have seen through Marcus's lies. Having someone else say otherwise felt like absolution. "He moved us up here within a week," she continued. "Said Montana was a fresh start. But once we got here, everything changed. He had a temper, and when he drank, which was most nights, he took it out on us. First just yelling and throwing things, then pushing and slapping. Tonight was the first time he really hurt Sophia, but I knew it wouldn't be the last." James stood and moved to the window, pulling aside the heavy curtain to peer out into the night. Elena watched his profile, noting the firm set of his jaw and the way his hands clenched in a fist at his sides. I see headlights, he said quietly. Elena's blood turned to ice. She started to stand, but James turned back to her quickly. Stay here, he said. His voice carried absolute authority now, the voice of a man accustomed to making decisions and having them followed. Whatever happens, you stay in this chair until I tell you otherwise. The sound of a truck door slamming echoed across the night, followed by heavy footsteps on the porch. Elena clutched the blanket around herself, her whole body shaking again. She wanted to run, to hide, to become invisible, but there was nowhere to go. When the pounding came on the door, it was exactly what she had expected. Marcus always knocked like he was trying to break down whatever barrier stood between him and what he wanted. I know she's in there. Marcus's voice carried clearly through the heavy door. Elena, get out here right now. James looked at Elena, his expression serious but calm. Is that him? She nodded, unable to speak. Stay put, he said again, and walked to the door. When James opened it, Elena couldn't see Marcus from where she sat, but she could hear his voice clearly. He sounded drunk, which was not unusual, but also desperate, which was new. I want my wife back, Marcus said without preamble. Your wife. James's voice was perfectly level. Elena, I saw her footprints in the snow leading up to your house. She's not right in the head sometimes, gets confused, and wanders off. I'll come and take her home. Elena closed her eyes, recognizing the story. Marcus was good at these explanations, at making himself sound like the reasonable one. He would paint her as unstable, possibly dangerous to herself. People would nod sympathetically and help him load her back into his truck. But James Carson was not most people. I don't see a wedding ring on her finger, James said conversationally. We're not legally married, but we've been together 3 years. Common law. She's my responsibility. Funny thing about responsibility, James replied, and Elena could hear the steel creeping into his voice. Usually when someone's responsible for another person's welfare, that person doesn't end up barefoot and bleeding in a snowstorm. There was a pause, and Elena could imagine Marcus trying to process this unexpected resistance. He was used to people stepping aside when he demanded something. Look, friend, I don't know what she told you, but Elena's got a vivid imagination. She makes up stories when she's upset. I'm just trying to get her home where she belongs. Where she belongs, James repeated slowly, is wherever she chooses to be. And right now, she's choosing to be here. You don't understand the situation. I understand it perfectly. James's voice cut through Marcus's protests like a blade. I understand that a woman showed up at my door injured and terrified. I understand that she's under my protection now. And I understand that you're on my property uninvited. Elena held her breath, waiting for Marcus to explode. He didn't handle defiance well, especially from other men. But when he spoke again, his voice was different. Calculating. This isn't over, Marcus said. Elena knows where she belongs, and so do I. You're just some rich boy playing hero. But this isn't your world, and these aren't your people. You're right about one thing, James said. This isn't over. Because if I see you on my property again without invitation, or if I hear that you've bothered Elena or her sister, I'll introduce you to some Montana justice you won't forget. The threat was delivered so calmly that it took a moment for the full weight of it to register. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Elena could picture him weighing his options. He was cunning but not stupid. James Carson carried real authority in this valley, the kind that came from respect rather than fear. We'll see, Marcus said finally, but some of the fight had gone out of his voice. Elena heard footsteps retreating across the porch, then the sound of the truck starting up. She didn't move from her chair until the engine noise faded completely into the distance. James returned to the living room, his expression thoughtful. He added another log to the fire before settling into the chair across from Elena. He'll be back, Elena said quietly. Probably, but not tonight. James leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. We need to talk about what happens next. I can't stay here, Elena said quickly. I won't bring trouble to your door. You've already done more than anyone else ever has. Where exactly are you planning to go? You don't have shoes, money, or transportation, and your sister is still with him. The mention of Sophia made Elena's stomach clench with guilt. While she sat in warmth and safety, her little sister was still trapped in that trailer with Marcus. She had promised their mother that she would always protect Sophia, and she had failed. I need to go back for her, Elena said, starting to stand. No, James's voice stopped her cold. You walk back into that trailer tonight, and you'll both be dead by morning. Marcus is angry and drunk, and men like that don't make rational decisions. Then what do you suggest? I can't just abandon her. You're not abandoning her. You're getting help. James stood and moved to a desk in the corner, returning with a cordless phone. We're going to call someone who can actually do something about this situation. I told you, the sheriff won't, not the sheriff. My cousin David. He's a federal agent with the DEA, and he owes me a favor. James began dialing. Marcus isn't just abusing you, too. I'm willing to bet he's into other things that would interest federal law enforcement. Elena watched him place the call, speaking in low, urgent tones to someone who clearly trusted his judgment. She had never had someone fight for her before, had never experienced what it felt like to have someone with real power decide that her safety mattered. When James finished the call, he sat back down across from her. David's making some calls tonight. By tomorrow, we'll know exactly what Marcus Reeves has been up to since he moved to Montana. And we'll have options. Why are you doing this? Elena asked. You don't even know me. James was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was softer than it had been all evening. My grandmother lived with us when I was growing up, he said. My grandfather brought her here from Mexico when she was 18. She used to tell me stories about women she had known who weren't as lucky as she was. Women who ended up with men who saw them as property instead of people. He looked at Elena directly. She made me promise that if I ever had the chance to help someone in that situation, I would do whatever it took. And you think that's what this is? I think you're a woman who's been treated like property for too long, James said simply. And I think it's time that stopped. Elena pulled the blanket closer around herself. Not because she was cold anymore, but because the gesture made her feel protected. For the first time in 3 years, someone was offering her real help without asking for anything in return. What happens to Sophia tonight? David's contacts in the sheriff's department will do a welfare check within the hour. They'll have a reason to remove her from the home if they find evidence of abuse. James's expression was grim, and Marcus will be too busy dealing with law enforcement to come looking for you. And what happens to me? James was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the firelight. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but certain. That depends on what you want to happen, he said. But whatever you choose, you're safe here for as long as you need. Elena closed her eyes and let herself imagine, for the first time in years, what it might feel like to make her own choices. To wake up in the morning without fear. To speak without calculating whether her words would anger someone. To exist as herself instead of as someone's possession. Outside, the wind was dying down, and the house settled into the comfortable silence of a place where people could rest without looking over their shoulders. Elena opened her eyes to find James still watching her, patient and steady as stone. I want to be free, she said, and the words felt like the first honest thing she had said in 3 years. Then, you will be, James replied, and something in his voice made her believe that it might actually be possible. Elena woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, luxuries that had been rare in Marcus's trailer. For a moment, she lay still in the unfamiliar bed, wrapped in soft sheets that smelled like lavender fabric softener, trying to remember where she was. Then, the events of the previous night rushed back, and she sat up quickly, wincing as her injured feet touched the floor. She was in a guest bedroom that was larger than the entire living area she had shared with Sophia. The walls were painted a warm cream color, and morning sunlight streamed through windows framed by simple blue curtains. Someone had left clean clothes folded on the dresser, jeans that looked like they might fit her, a soft red sweater, and undergarments still in their packages with store tags attached. Elena dressed quickly, amazed by the simple pleasure of putting on clothes that weren't torn or stained. The sweater was cashmere, softer than anything she had ever owned. The jeans fit perfectly, as if someone had guessed her size with remarkable accuracy. She found thick wool socks in the dresser drawer, which helped cushion her bandaged feet. Downstairs, James stood at the stove in the kitchen, wearing work clothes and looking like he had been awake for hours. The kitchen was exactly what Elena had imagined a real home would have. Solid wood cabinets, granite countertops, and a large window that looked out over snow-covered pastures where cattle moved like dark spots against the white landscape. "Good morning," James said without turning around. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in years," Elena admitted, taking a seat at the kitchen island. "Thank you for the clothes. I called my neighbor Sarah around sunrise. She and her daughter drove into town and picked up some things." James turned to face her, holding a cup of coffee. "I hope the sizes are right." "They're perfect." Elena accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Did you hear anything from your cousin?" James's expression grew serious. "David called an hour ago. The welfare check on Sophia went exactly as we hoped. She's in protective custody right now, being examined by a doctor." Relief flooded through Elena so powerfully that she nearly dropped her coffee. "Is she hurt?" "Bruised ribs, some cuts, and scrapes. Nothing that won't heal." James began loading eggs and bacon onto 2 plates. "She told a social worker about you, about what happened last night. She's worried sick. Can I see her?" "This afternoon." David's driving down from Billings to handle things personally. James set a plate in front of Elena, loaded with more food than she usually ate in an entire day. "He's also bringing news about Marcus." Elena picked at her eggs, her appetite dampened by anxiety. "What kind of news?" "Turns out Marcus Reeves has been busy since he moved to Montana. Drug trafficking mostly, using his trailer as a distribution point for meth coming up from Mexico. David's colleagues have been watching him for months, building a case." "Drugs?" Elena stared at James in shock. "I never saw any drugs. You weren't supposed to. He kept you and Sophia isolated so you couldn't accidentally witness anything that might compromise his operation." James sat down across from her, his own breakfast untouched. "Having you two, there was perfect cover. What law enforcement officer would suspect a family man living quietly with his girlfriend and her sister?" The revelation reframed everything Elena thought she understood about the past 3 years. Marcus's random absences, his unexplained income despite having no visible job, his paranoia about her going to town alone. It all made sense now. "So what happens to him?" "Federal charges. Drug trafficking, kidnapping, assault. David says he's looking at 20 years minimum." James's expression was grim. "He's in federal custody as of this morning." Elena set down her fork, overwhelmed. After 3 years of feeling trapped and powerless, the idea that Marcus was gone, really gone, seemed too good to be true. "You're sure? He can't get out on bail or anything?" "Not with his record. Turns out Montana wasn't his first stop. He's been running the same operation in 3 different states, always moving on when things got too hot." James reached across the table and covered her hand with his own. "He can't hurt you or Sophia anymore." The touch was brief and gentle, but it sent warmth spreading through Elena's chest. She looked at James across the breakfast table, this man who had opened his door to a stranger and somehow changed her entire life in less than 12 hours. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You don't need to thank me. You need to figure out what you want to do next." It was a question Elena had never been allowed to consider. For 3 years, her life had been entirely reactive, focused on survival and protecting Sophia. The idea of making actual choices about her future felt foreign and overwhelming. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've never had options before." James was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "What did you want to be when you were younger? Before everything happened?" "A teacher," Elena said without hesitation. "I was good in school, especially with kids. I used to tutor younger students for extra money." She paused, remembering. "I was supposed to start college the fall after my mother got sick. I had a scholarship to the state university. What stopped you?" "She needed me. The medical bills, taking care of her, try to keep Sophia in school. Then she died, and Marcus showed up, and Elena trailed off. Life got in the way. Life got stolen from you, James corrected firmly. There's a difference. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, Elena slowly working through the enormous breakfast James had prepared. Through the kitchen window, she could see ranch hands moving around the property, feeding cattle and checking equipment. The scene looked peaceful and purposeful in a way that made her chest ache with longing. "What's it like?" she asked. "Living here, I mean. Running all this." James followed her gaze out the window. "Challenging. Rewarding. Sometimes frustrating as hell when the weather doesn't cooperate or the market drops." He looked back at her. "But it's mine. Every decision, every success or failure, it all belongs to me. I've never had anyone else control what I could do or where I could go." "It sounds like freedom," Elena said softly. "It is. And freedom is something you can build for yourself too, if you want it." Before Elena could respond, her phone buzzed on the counter where James had plugged it into charge. She had forgotten she even had it. Marcus had controlled when and how she could use it, mostly limiting her to emergency calls. The screen showed 3 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize. James handed her the phone. "David's number," he explained. Elena called back, and David's voice answered on the first ring. He sounded like James, but with a slight accent that suggested more time spent in cities than on ranches. "Elena, this is David Carson. I'm about 20 minutes out from town. Can you meet me at the sheriff's office? I have Sophia with me." Elena's heart leaped. "Is she okay?" "She's fine. Scared, but fine. She's been asking for you since they picked her up." Elena looked at James, who was already reaching for his truck keys. "We'll be there," she said. The drive into Cedar Valley took 15 minutes on roads that wound through snow-covered countryside. Elena sat in the passenger seat of James's truck, watching the landscape roll by and trying to process everything that had changed in less than a day. Yesterday morning, she had been afraid to look out the window without Marcus's permission. Now she was riding through Montana with a man who treated her like an equal, on her way to be reunited with her sister. The sheriff's office was a small brick building on Main Street, sandwiched between a hardware store and a cafe. James parked and turned to Elena before they got out. "Whatever David suggests, whatever anyone suggests, remember that the choice is yours," he said. "You don't owe anyone anything. Not me, not the federal government, not anybody." Elena nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed it yet. The idea of having real choices would take time to feel natural. Inside, the sheriff's office looked like something from a movie, with wood-paneled walls and old-fashioned desk lamps. A tall man who shared James's dark hair, but had sharp green eyes instead of brown, stood up from a conference table when they entered. This had to be David. "Elena," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Special Agent David Carson. Thank you for coming in." Elena shook his hand, impressed by his professional manner. He wore a dark suit and had the kind of quiet authority that suggested extensive experience dealing with situations like hers. "Where's Sophia?" Elena asked immediately. "Right here," a familiar voice said from behind David. Elena turned to see her sister emerging from what looked like a break room, accompanied by a woman in a professional blazer who was probably a social worker. Sophia looked small and fragile, with a bruise darkening on her left cheek and her long black hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. But her eyes were bright and alert, and when she saw Elena, she ran forward without hesitation. The sisters embraced fiercely, Elena holding Sophia tight and breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. Sophia felt thinner than Elena remembered, all sharp angles and nervous energy. "Are you hurt?" Sophia whispered against Elena's shoulder. "I'm fine. Are you?" "Better now." Sophia pulled back to look at her sister, taking in the new clothes and the obvious signs that Elena had been well cared for. "This is really over? Marcus is really gone?" "It's really over," Elena confirmed, and saying the word aloud made them feel more real. David gestured toward the conference table. "Why don't we all sit down? I have some things to explain and some decisions we need to make." Elena and Sophia took seats next to each other, their hands clasped together. James sat across from them, while David remained standing, clearly in his element when presenting information. First, the good news, David began. Marcus Reeves is in federal custody and will remain there. We've charged him with drug trafficking, kidnapping, and assault. With his prior record, he's looking at a minimum of 20 years in federal prison. What about us? Sophia asked. What happens to us now? That's more complicated, David admitted. Elena, you're an adult, so you're free to go wherever you choose. Sophia, you're still a minor, which means you need either a legal guardian or placement in the foster care system until you turn 18. Elena's stomach dropped. After everything they had been through, the idea of being separated from Sophia was unbearable. Can I be your guardian? Elena asked quickly. Potentially, yes, but there are requirements. You need to demonstrate financial stability, suitable housing, and the ability to provide for her needs. David's expression was kind, but realistic. Right now, you don't have any of those things. What are our options? James asked quietly. Well, Sophia could enter foster care temporarily while Elena gets established. The state would try to place her with a local family, preferably one that would allow regular contact with her sister. David sat down finally, his official manner softening slightly. Or we could explore other arrangements. What kind of other arrangements? Elena asked. David glanced at James before continuing. My cousin has made an offer. He's willing to provide housing and employment for both of you while Elena establishes legal guardianship. It would be temporary, just until you get on your feet. Elena looked at James in shock. You would do that? I have a house that's sitting empty, my foreman's old place. It's small but comfortable, and it comes with the job I'm offering you. James's expression was carefully neutral. The ranch always needs help during calving season, which starts in a few weeks. Basic ranch work, some bookkeeping, helping with the cattle, room and board plus a salary that should be enough to satisfy the guardianship requirements. What about school? Sophia asked. I'm supposed to graduate in May. Cedar Valley High is about 10 minutes from the ranch, James said. I could drive you in the mornings, and there's a bus that runs back out in the afternoons. Elena stared at him, tried to process the offer. Why would you do this for us? Because you need help, and I'm in a position to provide it, James said simply. And because good ranch hands are hard to find, especially ones who aren't afraid of hard work. Sophia squeezed Elena's hand under the table. It sounds too good to be true, she whispered. Elena understood her sister's skepticism. After 3 years with Marcus, any offer that seemed generous made them both suspicious. But looking at James across the conference table, seeing the steady honesty in his brown eyes, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Trust. What would you expect in return? She asked, needing to understand the terms clearly. 40 hours a week of ranch work, reliability, and honesty, James said without hesitation. That's it. David cleared his throat. I've known James my whole life, and I can guarantee his motives are exactly what he says they are. But, Elena, you should know that accepting this arrangement would mean staying in Montana for at least the next year and a half, until Sophia graduates. Are you prepared for that commitment? Elena thought about the alternatives. Foster care for Sophia, shelters or minimum wage jobs in an unfamiliar city for herself, the constant struggle to stay afloat with no safety net. Then, she thought about the way James had cared for her injuries the night before, the way he had stood up to Marcus without hesitation, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him like warmth from a fire. What do you think? She asked Sophia quietly. I think we've been running for 3 years, Sophia said. Maybe it's time to try staying somewhere. Elena looked around the conference table at the people who had somehow become their advocates in less than 24 hours. David, who had used his federal authority to remove them from danger. James, who had opened his home to strangers and was now offering them a chance to build a life. The social worker, who had spent her morning making sure Sophia was safe and cared for. We accept, Elena said, and felt something tight in her chest finally begin to loosen. Good, David said, his professional mask slipping to reveal obvious relief. I'll start the guardianship paperwork immediately. With Marcus's federal charges, there shouldn't be any complications. When can we see the house? Sophia asked, a note of excitement creeping into her voice for the first time in months. James smiled, and Elena realized it was the first time she had seen him look truly relaxed since they met. How about right now? The drive to the foreman's house took them deeper into Carson Ranch property, past the main house and barn, through gates that James opened and closed with practiced efficiency. The house sat in a grove of bare cottonwood trees, small but solid-looking, with a covered porch and smoke curling from the chimney. I had the furnace and utilities turned on this morning, James explained as they parked. The previous foreman left most of the furniture, so it's basically move-in ready. Inside, the house was everything Elena had dreamed of during the worst nights in Marcus's trailer. 2 bedrooms, a comfortable living room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with actual counter space, and a dining table. The furniture was worn but clean, and someone had stocked the refrigerator and pantry with basic supplies. Sophia ran from room to room like a child exploring a playground, calling out discoveries. Elena, look, this bedroom has its own closet, and there's a bookshelf in the living room. Elena stood in the kitchen, running her hand over the smooth laminate counter, trying to convince herself that this was real. Through the window over the sink, she could see cattle moving across snow-covered pastures, and beyond that, mountains rising against the clear winter sky. The previous foreman left some clothes in the master bedroom that might fit you, James said, joining her at the window. And there are boots by the back door that should work until we can get you properly outfitted. James, Elena said softly, not turning from the window. Why are you really doing this? He was quiet for a long moment, and when Elena glanced at him, his expression was thoughtful. I've been successful my whole life, he said finally. Inherited a profitable ranch, built it into something bigger, never wanted for anything important. But success without purpose feels empty. He looked at her directly. Maybe helping you and Sophia gives my life a purpose it's been missing. And if we disappoint you, if we're not what you hope we'll be, then we'll figure it out as we go, James said simply. But I don't think that's going to happen. Elena turned back to the window, watching Sophia build a snowman in the front yard with the focused intensity she had always brought to everything she cared about. Her sister was laughing, the sound carrying clearly through the glass, and Elena realized she couldn't remember the last time she had heard Sophia laugh. I want to earn this, Elena said suddenly. Whatever you're paying me, whatever this costs you, I want to work for it. I don't want charity. Good, James said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Because cattle don't care about your circumstances. They just need to be fed and cared for every single day, regardless of weather or how you feel about it. When do we start? Tomorrow morning. 5:30. James's grin was challenging. Think you can handle it? Elena thought about the past 3 years, about surviving Marcus's rages and protecting Sophia and finding the courage to run barefoot through a snowstorm when everything depended on it. Ranch work, no matter how demanding, had to be easier than that. I can handle it, she said, and meant it completely. 6 months later, Elena stood in the feed room of the main barn, calculating nutrition ratios for the pregnant cows with the kind of precision that had made her a natural at ranch management. Her hands, once soft and unmarked, now bore calluses from handling hay bales and fixing fence. Her skin had been bronzed by the Montana sun, and her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid that stayed out of her way during the long work days. The transformation hadn't been easy. Those first weeks had nearly broken her body and spirit. 5:30 mornings in sub-zero temperatures, learning to handle cattle that outweighed her by 1,000 pounds, mastering tasks that required strength she didn't possess, and knowledge she had never needed. But James had been patient, showing her the same task repeatedly until her hands learned what her mind couldn't quite grasp, never making her feel stupid or inadequate. Elena. Sophia's voice called from the barn entrance. James wants to see you up at the main house when you're finished. Elena looked up from her calculations, noting the excitement in her sister's voice. At 18 now, Sophia had blossomed during their months on the ranch. She had graduated high school 2 weeks ago as valedictorian, accepted a full scholarship to the University of Montana, and grown into the confident young woman their mother had always believed she could become. Did he say what about? Elena asked, wiping her hands on her work jeans. Nope, but he's got that look. Sophia grinned, the expression lighting up her whole face. The one he gets when he's planning something. Elena had learned to recognize that look too. It was the same expression James had worn when he quietly arranged for Elena to take her GED, then helped her enroll in online college courses. The same look he'd had when he suggested Elena take over more of the ranch's financial management, recognizing her natural aptitude for numbers and organization. James was always planning something, usually something that would benefit others more than himself. The walk to the main house took Elena past the pastures where cattle grazed peacefully in the late afternoon sun. Spring had brought new calves, and Elena felt a surge of pride watching the healthy animals that she had helped bring into the world. Calving season had been her real test. Long nights in the barn helping with difficult births, learning to make life and death decisions with confidence. She had passed that test, earned the respect of the other ranch hands, and proven to herself that she was capable of much more than she had ever imagined. Elena found James in his office, a comfortable room lined with agricultural journals and family photographs. He was studying something on his computer screen with the focused intensity he brought to everything important. When she knocked on the open door, he looked up with a smile that still had the power to make her heart skip. "Come in," he said, standing to offer her the chair across from his desk. "How are the feed calculations coming?" "Finished. We'll need to adjust the protein content for the pregnant heifers, but otherwise everything looks good for the next quarter." Elena settled into the chair, noting the formal documents spread across James's desk. "Sophia said you wanted to see me?" "I did." James sat back down, but instead of returning to the papers, he gave her his full attention. "Elena, in 6 months, you've become more than just an employee here. You've become essential to this operation." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. Praise still made her uncomfortable, a lingering effect of 3 years with Marcus, who had convinced her that she was worthless. "I'm just doing my job." "You're doing much more than that. You've improved efficiency in every area you've touched, saved the ranch money, and earned the respect of everyone who works here." James's expression grew serious, "Which is why I have a proposition for you." Elena's stomach tightened with familiar anxiety. In her experience, propositions usually meant someone wanted something she didn't want to give. "What kind of proposition?" James turned his computer screen so she could see the spreadsheet displayed there. "I've been analyzing the ranch's financials, looking for ways to expand operations. The numbers show that we could support a significant increase in cattle, maybe even branch into sheep or horses, but only with the right management structure." Elena studied the spreadsheet, recognizing her own work in some of the formulas and projections. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about offering you a partnership." Elena's breath caught. "What?" "A junior partnership, initially, 20% stake in the ranch, with the possibility of increasing that percentage over time based on performance and contribution." James leaned forward, his expression intent. "You'd have real decision-making authority, profit sharing, and equity in the operation." Elena stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. "James, I've been here 6 months. I'm still learning. You're learning faster than anyone I've ever seen. And more importantly, you understand this place, this work, in a way that can't be taught." James gestured toward the window that looked out over the ranch. "Elena, you were born to do this. I've watched you with the animals, seen how you think about the business side of things. This ranch is already as much yours as it is mine. But I don't have money to buy into a partnership. I don't have anything to offer except yourself, your intelligence, your work ethic, your natural ability." James's voice was firm. "Elena, partnerships aren't just about money. They're about finding the right person to build something with. You're that person. Elena felt tears threatening and blinked them back. I don't understand why you would do this. Because this ranch needs to grow to survive, and I can't do that alone. Because you've earned it. And because James paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Because I come to care about you more than I ever intended to. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that Elena wasn't sure she was ready to face. During the long months of working side by side, she had felt the attraction growing between them, had noticed the way James's eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking, had become aware of her own racing heart when he stood close enough for her to smell his aftershave. But she had convinced herself it was one-sided, that a man like James Carson would never seriously consider someone like her. James, she said softly, I don't want you to offer me this because you feel sorry for me, or because you think you owe me something. I'm offering it because I want to spend the rest of my life building something with you, James said quietly. The partnership is separate from how I feel about you personally, but I'd be lying if I said the two weren't connected. Elena stood and walked to the window, looking out at the land that had become home in a way that nowhere else ever had. The cattle were moving toward the barn for evening feeding, following patterns she had learned to read like a language. The mountains in the distance were purple with approaching sunset, and the whole scene looked like something from a dream of the perfect life. What about Sophia? She asked. What about her? She's part of the package, as far as I'm concerned. She'll go to college, but this will always be her home if she wants it. James joined Elena at the window. I've grown to care about her, too. She's family now. Family. The word that had been twisted and corrupted by Marcus, used as a weapon to control and manipulate, was being offered to her now in its true form. Family meant protection, support, belonging. Family meant having people who would fight for you and stand beside you no matter what. I'm scared, Elena admitted. Of what? Of wanting this too much. Of believing it's real and then having it taken away. Elena turned to face James, seeing her own vulnerability reflected in his eyes. I've learned not to trust good things. I understand that. But, Elena, what we've built here over the past 6 months is real. Your work, your place on this ranch, the way I feel about you, none of that is going anywhere. James reached for her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. I'm not asking you to trust blindly. I'm asking you to take a chance on something that could be extraordinary. Elena looked down at their joined hands, amazed by how right it felt. What would the partnership mean exactly? James smiled, recognizing her question as the beginning of acceptance. It means you'd have equal say in all major decisions about the ranch. It means your name on the deed alongside mine. It means profit sharing and equity that builds your financial security. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. And it means we're building something together that belongs to both of us. And personally, what would it mean personally? It means I'd like to court you properly, James said, his formal phrasing making Elena smile despite her nerves. Take you on dates, spend time getting to know each other outside of work, see if what I think is happening between us is real. James Carson, are you asking me to be your girlfriend? Elena asked, unable to keep the teasing note out of her voice. Eventually, I'm asking you to be my wife, James said seriously. But I figure we should start with the girlfriend part and see how it goes. Elena's heart stopped completely for a moment before resuming at double speed. Wife, I know it's too soon to talk about that seriously. But, Elena, I'm 35 years old, and I've never met anyone who fits into my life the way you do. I've never had anyone challenge me and support me and make me want to be better all at the same time. James lifted their joined hands and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm hoping you're not either. Elena thought about the woman who had stumbled to his door 6 months ago, broken and terrified and convinced that she was worthless. That woman seemed like a stranger now. In her place stood someone who could manage a cattle operation, make financial decisions that affected people's livelihoods, and face the future with confidence instead of fear. I need to ask you something, Elena said. And I need you to be completely honest. Anything. Are you offering me this partnership because you love me? Or do you love me because you're offering me the partnership? James considered the question seriously, understanding why she needed to ask it. I offered Sarah Chin a job as my foreman 2 years ago, and I respected her professionally, but I never wanted to marry her. I offered David the chance to invest in expanding the operation, and I trust him completely, but I've never wanted to wake up next to him every morning. James cupped Elena's face gently with his free hand. I love you because of who you are, not because of what you can do for the ranch. The partnership offer exists because you're extraordinarily good at what you do. Both things are true, and neither one depends on the other. Elena leaned into his touch, marveling at how safe she felt with this man who had entered her life at her darkest moment. I love you too, she said quietly. I've been trying not to because it seemed impossible and dangerous and too good to be true. But I do. Then say yes, James said softly. To the partnership, to letting me court you properly, to building a life together. Say yes to all of it. Elena thought about the woman their mother had wanted her to become, educated, independent, strong enough to protect those she loved. She thought about Sophia, thriving and preparing for college, finally free to become whatever she chose to be. She thought about the cattle depending on her care, the ranch hands who had come to respect her judgment, the land that had taught her what she was truly capable of. Yes, she said, and James's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He kissed her then, gentle and careful and full of promise. Elena had been kissed before, but never like this. Never by someone who saw her as an equal, who valued her mind as much as anything else, who offered her partnership instead of protection. When they broke apart, James rested his forehead against hers. We should probably tell Sophia before the whole valley hears about it through the ranch gossip network. Elena laughed, feeling lighter than air. She already knows. She's been making comments about the way we look at each other for weeks. Smart girl. The smartest. She's going to love this. They found Sophia in the ranch house kitchen, supposedly studying for her final exams, but obviously waiting to hear what had happened in James's office. She took one look at Elena's glowing expression and James's arm around her waist and broke into a delighted grin. Finally, she said, jumping up to hug them both. I was starting to think I'd have to lock you two in a barn together until you figured out. You knew. Elena asked, please. James has been following you around like a lovesick puppy for months, and you've been pretending not to notice while blushing every time he smiles at you. Sophia looked between them with satisfaction. So what's the plan? Wedding? Babies? Expanding the ranch? Partnership first, Elena said, still getting used to the sound of it. Then, we'll see about the rest. Partnership in the ranch and in life, James clarified, pulling Elena closer against his side. Sophia clapped her hands together. This is perfect. Mom would have been so happy. Elena felt tears threaten again at the mention of their mother. She had spent so many nights wishing her mother could see Sophia graduate, could see them both safe and thriving. Now she found herself wishing for something different, that her mother could see her daughter truly happy, building a life with a good man who valued her for all the right reasons. She would have loved James, Elena said softly. She would have loved seeing you become who you were meant to be, Sophia replied, strong and confident and unafraid. That evening, Elena walked alone through the pastures, checking on the cattle one last time before dark. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that made the whole world look like something from a fairy tale. The cattle moved peacefully in the fading light, and Elena felt the deep satisfaction that came from work well done and animals well cared for. In the distance, she could see James in the barn, finishing the evening feeding. Sophia was visible through the kitchen window of the main house, cooking dinner and probably planning to interrogate them both about their relationship timeline. The scene looked like something from the life Elena had dreamed of during the worst moments with Marcus, when she had convinced herself that such happiness was impossible. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message, and she pulled it out to find a message from David Carson. Heard the good news from James. Congratulations on the partnership and everything else. Marcus's appeal was denied today. 25 years. No possibility of parole. He can never hurt you again. Elena stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Marcus Reeves felt like someone from another lifetime, a bad dream that had finally faded in the light of day. She had spent so many months looking over her shoulder, expecting him to reappear and destroy the life she was building. Now she realized she hadn't thought about him in weeks. She was free, truly, completely free. Free to love James without fear, to build a business with him, to plan a future that stretched out like the Montana sky, vast and full of possibilities. Free to be the woman her mother had raised her to be, before circumstances had forced her to become small and afraid. Elena walked back toward the lights of the ranch house, where James and Sophia were waiting for her. Tomorrow she would sign partnership papers that would make her a co-owner of one of the most successful ranches in the valley. Tomorrow she would start building a business and a life with a man who loved her for her strength instead of trying to break it. Tomorrow she would wake up as someone who had choices, who had power, who had a future she had chosen for herself. But tonight, she was simply Elena Martinez, walking home to people who loved her on land that belonged to her, under a sky that promised nothing but good things to come. The woman who had knocked on James Carson's door 6 months ago, barefoot and bleeding in the snow, would never have believed that such happiness was possible. But Elena Martinez, ranch partner and beloved woman, knew better. She had learned that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures, that running toward the unknown can be the bravest choice of all, and that love, real love, always says the same thing. No one touches you again. You are safe. You are valued. You are home.